thinking about that, and I was thinking about life and how often do we get so focused on what's going on around us that we don't get the big picture. We don't get the understanding of what life should be about. And we've been looking at this idea that there is a mission of the manger. And that's why I'm off to the side so you can see the manger, because it's all about the manger. That's what it's about. And we tend to forget that, no, I'm not talking about this wood manger. And those of you who've been here, you understand it's about the birth of Jesus Christ. But there is a mission that's found there. But we get so distracted, we forget about it. And sometimes we think the mission is to have the perfect Christmas tree. Now, I have nothing against Christmas trees, but I don't care if I have a Christmas tree, as long as I have Christ. And so we get really distracted, and I'm not going to ask for a raise of hands, but I'm pretty sure a bunch of us have been distracted this week. Life has been going at 110 miles an hour, and we're on a tricycle, and we're wondering when the wheels are going to blow off and we're going to do cartwheels, because that's the way life seems. Or life isn't going at all, and it should be going somewhere, and we're wondering, why are we stuck? And we're wondering what's going on. And it kind of reminds me of a day in January. It was actually January 12th of 2007. Life was busy and bustling, and the setting is Washington, D.C. If you've ever been to Washington, D.C., it's one of those cities that there's always something happening in it. And people are going back and forth, and it's just a busyness of life. And yet, one day, a guy named Josh decided he was going to go and try to brighten people's day by providing music at the subway station. And so he showed up for the morning commute, and he decided he was going to stay there for a couple hours. And he pulls out this beat-up old-looking violin case, and he opens it up, and he pulls out this old violin, and he tunes it, and he starts playing. And as he's playing, thousands and thousands of people pass by. And that was just in the first 45 minutes. Thousands and thousands of people passed by. And he had his case open, and as happens in the subways with musicians, people going by, those who noticed would stop and throw change or a dollar bill or something in just to say thanks for playing. And some people make their living that way. Well, Josh wasn't making his living. He just wanted to encourage people. And in that time, he collected $32 from 27 people in that first 45 minutes. And he went on to play, but $32 in 45 minutes, well, you know, that comes out to probably about $50 an hour. That's not bad pay. But the thing about Josh is, he was actually in town because of an engagement, a business engagement. You see, his name is actually Joshua Bell. He's a world-renowned violinist. And the old violin that he happened to pull out was one of the rare surviving Stradivarius violins, worth approximately $3 million. And he was there the night before he had played in the local symphony hall. And people had paid $100 a ticket to come hear him play his violin. Now I want you to think about it. 32 people the next day noticed him. Where there were thousands who paid hundreds of dollars to get in. When he gave it for free, the people were so busy with life that they didn't notice what was right in front of them. There we go, wow, that's kind of sad, but the truth is, how many of us go through life with Christ right in front of us, and we miss all that he has for us? We're so busy doing what we do, and we've organized our day in such a way that God isn't part of it, so we miss what he has for us. And our story today is kind of a sad story because it gives the same kind of idea. There's a Christmas season, the original Christmas season, life was busy, but people should have been prepared. They should have had a method to keep focused in the right place. But they didn't. And as you're turning to Matthew chapter 2, which is our text for today, I want to talk about methods. Now you might be thinking, okay, as I talk this a little bit, OCD, but OCD is good in minor quantities because it keeps us focused. If we didn't have OCD, we would be bouncing off the walls. I know some of us have that bounce off the wall personality. Anything shiny catches our attention and we can't forget what we were doing before. And that sometimes happens, but all of us need some kind of method to keep us focused. I know that when I was learning my trade, and I have a couple of trades under my belt, but one of them is a journeyman level status trade, and that is in graphic design and printing press operation. And as I was learning that, I was taught a method that every time I approached a press to run a job, there are things that you're supposed to go through, and if you miss those things, it can cause major issues. And when I was in high school, I went to the state level in competition for press operation, and I was going through what I should do as I was getting ready, and as I walked up and I did my initial check, I called one of the judges over and I said, "Excuse me, I cannot run this press." I'm like, "Why?" "Because I'm going to fail at what you want because of the condition of the press." I'm like, "What do you mean? We just had someone run it." I said, "I know." And I left at that. I said, "Why don't you come over here?" And wrapped around a bunch of the rollers, so on the ink rollers, actually on the water roller that no paper is supposed to get close to, there was paper wrapped around all of this, and it was starting to disintegrate, so it was causing fibers everywhere, which means you can't get a good image when you print. But because I knew the routine and I had a method of starting printing, when I approached the press, I was able to show them. And so one of the judges actually took the entire time lot that I had to clean the press. So I couldn't compete with everyone else. And they said, "Well, if you're willing to stick around when the others are done, we will let you go through the same time zone, and we will grade you on that and judge you on that, not based on your competition head-to-head with other people." Which was the only fair thing to do, because it wasn't my fault that the press was messed up. But if I hadn't had that routine, and if I hadn't had a method to keep focused, then things could have gone horribly wrong. It's kind of like when I was growing up, my dad said, whenever you walk up to your car, walk around it looking at the tires to make sure you don't have a flat tire. I heard that when I was first starting to drive, and I still do it today. I get out at the gas station, I walk around the car looking at the tires. I help get doors shut, and as I'm doing that, I look at the tires because I don't want to drive on a flat tire. It's a method that I have to stay focused on the important things. My question is, as we look at Christmas and the mission of the manger, do we have a method that keeps us focused on the right things? Because it's actually biblical. If we look at our text today, we're going to see that there are a bunch of guys who had a method to stay focused on the right thing. And these guys are called the Magi, also known as the wise men. Traditionally, but not biblically accurate, we assume that there were three because there were only three gifts, but there's probably more than that. But I want us to read their story. It's found in Matthew chapter 2, starting in verse 1, and it says this. After Jesus was born in Bethlehem, in Judea during the time of King Herod, Magi from the east came to Jerusalem. And they asked, "Where is the one who has been born King of the Jews? We saw a star in the east, and we have come to worship him." When Herod heard this, he was disturbed, and all Jerusalem with him. When he called together all the people's chief priests and teachers of the law, he asked them, "Where is the Christ?" Or he asked them where the Christ was to be born. "In Bethlehem, in Judea," they replied, "for this is what the prophet has written. But you, O Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah. For out of you will come a ruler, who is to be the shepherd of my people Israel." Verse 7. Then Herod called the Magi secretly and found out from them the exact time the star appeared. He sent them to Bethlehem and said, "Go, make a careful search for the child. As soon as you find him, report to me so that I too may go and worship him." After they heard the king, they went on their way. And the star that they had seen in the east went ahead of them, until it stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they were overjoyed. And on coming to the house, they saw the child with his mother Mary, and they bowed down and worshipped him. Then they opened their treasures and presented him with gifts of gold and incense and myrrh. And having been warned in a dream not to go back to Herod, they returned to the country by another route. I want you to think about that story. It's a story that many of us have known since little kids. Whether we attended church or not, there was usually a Christmas production, a Christmas play that talked about the wise men. When I was 7, I got to play one of the wise men because at the age of 7, I was the tallest kid in my class. And so I was very disappointed because it went gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And who cares about myrrh? I mean, but I got to be myrrh I got to bring myrrh. I wasn't actually myrrh. But we've heard these stories. And yet, these wise men had an incredible focus to what they did. They never lost sight of what their mission was about, and their mission was the mission of the manger, and we can learn so much, and we can adapt from what they give us, the example they give us as we look at the method of the Magi. And I want you to understand that this applies to you today, right now. If you want to stay focused in doing the mission of the manger, living it out today as we should be, you need to understand and grasp the method of the Magi. But it can apply to so many aspects of life. But as we look at this, the very first thing we see is that the Magi method means understanding the times. I want you to understand that because as they were going, we don't have a lot of explanation here about the Magi. We know that they were from the east. And if you look at a map, if you go east from Israel and from Bethlehem, you will end up in the old Babylonian Empire. You'll end up in the place where, if you know historically, and this is the thing I love about the Bible, it ties together Old Testament and New Testament so beautifully. If you go back, there was a guy who went to the Babylonian Empire, and he became the chief of the Magi. He was the head of the wise men. And he was there through the reign of at least 3 different kings. And so he established a method for them, and he actually set some parameters that they should be paying attention for certain things. His name was Daniel. Yes, the Daniel of the Bible, the Daniel who was in the lion's den. He was the head of the Magi, and so what he taught, what he instilled some 800 years before this event, they kept that method going so they would stay focused, because Daniel taught them there's going to come a time where there is going to be this incredible king that is born, King of the Jews, and you need to pay attention because he is worth worshiping. And they kept that method of remembering stuff. And so when it happened, they paid attention. Now it's interesting because the Jewish people themselves had all the prophecies. They had all of them. The Magi didn't necessarily have all of them. But the Jewish people didn't have a method to stay focused. So when it actually happened, if you go back and read the account, it says that when these Magi, the wise men, showed up, they started asking around town, where's the one-born king of the Jews? And Herod, who was the king at the time, got freaked out. He was concerned. He was worried. And Herod was known to be kind of insane. So when he got worried, it usually meant trouble for everybody else. And so it says that all of Jerusalem was worried along with them. Okay, there was good reason. But the sad thing is they had missed all the things pointing towards what Christmas was all about. They had missed all the prophecies that said so clearly what this was all about. They had missed the details of what was going on. And it says that we read it that when the Magi finally get to Jesus, they saw the child. He wasn't a newborn baby at this point. Sometimes we get messed up because of tradition. We see the angels and the shepherds, and then the wise men come right at the same time the baby's born. No, he was probably about 3 years old, 2 to 3 years old, because if you go and read the story, Herod wants to kill everyone under a certain age because that's when the star appeared. But as we look at this, the reason I'm bringing all that up is they understood the times and what was going on. This idea of understanding the times has been important all throughout Scripture. And to understand the times, we need to see what is happening around us and know what to do. It's not enough to see, because a lot of people observe. And just because you observe something doesn't mean you understand it and can do anything about it. But when we truly understand something that we see, then we can get involved. In fact, we're usually motivated to get involved. You see, we need to see what is happening around us and know what to do. That means there's action that is implied with understanding. And that's one of those things, so often we pursue knowledge but not understanding. I want to know more about God. I don't want to know more about God. I'll be honest with you. I don't want to know more about God. Why? Because everything I say I know I'm responsible to do. How many of you are sitting in a good spot right now? You're doing everything you've learned in the Bible? Okay, you do the math. How many times you go to church, for how many days a week, for how many years, and then if you throw any personal devotions on top of it. I don't want to know more about God. I want to know God more, and that's a different sermon and a different message, but it actually ties into this one a little bit later, and we'll get to that. But what we need to do is understand who God is and what we're supposed to do. Do you truly understand the mission of the manger? Do you truly understand your part and what you're supposed to do? Do you understand how to stay focused? You have to understand, and understanding comes from God's Word. Daniel, 800 years before, had brought parts of the scroll, at least in his heart and mind, and he'd written it out, and he'd passed it on, these prophecies of the coming Messiah. And that's what they had to go off of. And they knew that it was going to be announced in a special way. They knew that all creation was going to rejoice at the birth of this Messiah. So when they saw something peculiar, they said, this has to be it. It hasn't happened yet. This has to be it. They saw and understood what was going on. To understand that seeing is never enough. If we were doing stuff and we had a church picnic down at the river and we were all having a good time and we saw the kids out playing in the water, no big deal. But if we saw one of them struggling to keep their head above the water, we go, oh, look, they're drowning. We saw it, we observed it, and then we go back to eating our fried chicken. No. We wouldn't do that because we see a kid struggling to keep their head up and go, okay, they're drowning. We understand that they need help. And we would go into action because understanding results in action. And we need to be willing to do that. But this idea, like I said, isn't new. If you go back to the Old Testament, you can look it up later. It's in 1 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 32. It's talking about the tribes of Israel. And it says this. It says in there that there's the men of Issachar, and it lists how many chiefs there are and all their peoples connected to them. But this is their description. They understood the times and knew what to do. And that's what set them apart as one of the tribes of Israel. We need to be modern Magi, modern men of Issachar who understand the times, who see what's happening around us. We don't get distracted by all the little things. You know, you go, what kind of little things are there? Well, there's a whole hubbub in politics about impeachment. That's a little thing. Why is that a little thing? Well, let's see, in light of eternity, that's a little thing. That's what we need to understand is if we see what's going on around us and we understand the times and we know what to do, life isn't about what's happening now. Life is about eternity. And to understand what I need to do is I need to help other people get to eternity. So politics doesn't matter in light of eternity. Your salvation matters in light of eternity. You can tell me you go to church every day, but if you don't have a relationship with God, I'm sorry. The big picture says you need a relationship with God, and it will change everything. Therefore, who cares what you're going through right now? Discover God. We need to get that big picture. We need to understand what to do. And then we need to get active about it. How many of us know that Christmas is one of the best times to invite someone to church? Well, in case you didn't know that, I'll let you know Christmas is one of the best times. In fact, the best Sunday in the entire year to invite someone to church isn't a Sunday. Unless Christmas Eve falls on a Sunday. Christmas Eve is the best time to invite someone to church. It's the most likely time that they will come because they know it's going to be short and sweet and to the point. And they know that that's what Christmas is all about. And you're my religious relative or neighbor and I'll go with you. How many of us have been inviting people? I've invited a couple people this past week because God put them in my way and they said, oh, Christmas Eve, you guys had that service, right? I said, yeah, you should come. Well, I might do that. Now I have to follow up and I have to give them one of these things. The invitation slips that are in your bulletin. They're in your bulletin this week and then we're going to be more next week. We want to see this place packed out to hear the hope of eternity. But that means we have to understand that it's not about Christmas Eve, it's about eternity. Do we want them to spend eternity in heaven, thriving in life, or do we want to see them spend eternity in hell? Oh, Pastor, why are you talking about hell on the Christmas message? Because that's the big picture. That's understanding the times and knowing what to do. And so we need to understand that. We need to be focused on that. We need to be heading towards that. And remember, it's different than observation. You see, most people, including the Jews at that time, observed the prophecies. Yes, we can recite and quote them, but they couldn't see them coming alive in front of their very eyes. You might be going, Pastor, why was that the case? It's really kind of simple. They interpreted the prophecies to match their desires. And so they didn't see the reality happening in front of them. We go, why didn't God keep His word? We read about it all the time. God's faithful to His word. He never changes. But I don't see Him answering my prayers. Yeah, you do. But half the time or most of the time it's no because you're asking the wrong thing. God, I thought you promised this. No, this is what He actually promised. You've twisted it to match what you want, and then you're complaining to God that He doesn't do what you want. You miss out on the reality that's there. The reality is there, and we need to understand the times and know what to do. So here's my question for you. Do you understand today what God is doing in the world? Do you understand his message and how it applies to everyone you meet? Because if you don't, that's the starting point. God, help me understand. You don't have to pretend that you're some theologian. I'm not a theologian. I'll just tell you that. I love to study God's Word, but I wouldn't be classified as a theologian. I can't speak any of the ancient dead languages. And you study age and go back to what the original Greek words mean and the Hebrew words mean, but I can't speak them. One of my Bible school professors was one of the premier in the world at that time Greek scholars, and one of my other ones was one of the premier Hebrew scholars. They were actually involved in the translation of the Bible when the NIV was translated in 1984. They were theologians. I just love God. But in loving God, I have to be in his Word. I have to know what it says and how it applies to life today. So are we doing that? You see, there's something important that's implied here. And that is the Magi. Remember the first point? The Magi method means understanding the times. But then we have to also understand that the Magi method means we are prepared for whatever it will take. It's not enough to understand, but we have to be prepared for the action I talked about. And you might be going, okay, there's action. I gave the illustration of a child struggling to stay above water. But if you don't know how to swim, there's nothing you can do with your understanding that that child is drowning because you can't swim either. So in that situation, for you to be prepared to help a child that is struggling to swim, you need to know how to swim. And it would be better if you know how to swim and the proper method of saving a life. Because all those are important. Just swimming isn't enough because you can find yourself in deep water. Yes, it was intentional. If you don't know what to do. So, as we look at this, are we prepared to do what it takes to accomplish the Magi method and see the mission of the manger fulfilled? And we go, what do you mean, prepare what it takes? Well, if you go back to the story, they say that they had been waiting. They understood what they were looking for. They understood that when something happened, they needed to go and worship. But it says that when that happened, they went. How many of you, if you found out there was a very important thing that you had to go to, and it was going to happen next week on the other side of the country, you could pack up and go and be there by the end of next week? Most of us are going, no, I can't do that. Well, then you're not prepared for what might be coming. It's kind of like me in my life, and I love the life that God's given me, but I have to ask the question, and it's our little point under number one. Are you ready at a moment's notice to obey God's call, including talking to anyone about the message and the mission of the manger? And I said at a moment's notice. I love spontaneity. I really do. I love the excitement. I love the challenge of adapting to ongoing situations. I enjoy it. People go, you're crazy. No, I love it. And when I first started dating my wife, and before I started dating my wife, I would love spontaneous trips. Oh, I got off work now, and I don't have to be work for 72 hours. Let's drive 3 states away and see what we can discover. Where are you going? I have no idea. We're just going. Well, you didn't pack anything. I know. I'll buy it on the way if I need something. We're good to go. Spontaneity. But as I got married, marriage wasn't a big deal. First kid wasn't a big deal. Second kid wasn't a big deal. But when you start adding kids to that, spontaneity kind of disappears. Well, when you have pets that almost outnumber your kids, spontaneity disappears because you can't just leave for a week and a half and have your pets not fed. There's a problem there. You have to be a little bit more methodical and work things out and be able to understand what's going on. But that doesn't mean you can't be prepared. And then when you add farm animals in that have to be taken care of on a regular basis so they can produce what they're supposed to produce, then spontaneity is out the window. I mean, some of you grew up on ranches, you know that spontaneity doesn't happen because you're there to feed them, you're there to take care of them, you're there, and the only way you can quote unquote be spontaneous is already have a crew lined up that says, if something happens, I'm calling you and I'm out of here. That's the closest to being spontaneous that you can be. But I want to ask you, are you ready at a moment's notice to obey God's call, talking to anyone if you need to. If you look at these Magi, they were respected in their own country, but they were now in a different country. They had some social status because it could be seen by how they arrived and the things that they brought with them. But they didn't assume they had any rights or authority. So when they got to the town, they started asking people, where's the one born King of Jews? Where's the one born King of Jews? They talked to anyone about this idea. Until finally the king actually heard it, and they had to go before the king. Okay, you're going before the king and you're asking where's your child that was born, is basically the question. I didn't know I was expecting. Some of you might have made that mistake to loved ones where you went, oh, you're looking so radiant. When is the baby due? I'm not going to have a baby. I made that mistake once. Once. I've never talked to the lady again in my life. Her husband? Yes, but not her. She won't talk to me because I made a mistake and she was highly offended that I thought she was pregnant. But the wise men didn't make that mistake because they were wise. But they still had the courage to go and talk to anyone about why they were there. Are we ready to go and talk to anyone, to do what God has asked us to do? No matter what. Or here's the question, what is holding you back from doing that? What is holding you back from immediate obedience, which is actually just basic obedience, but I have to put the qualifier in because we think the way obedience works. It doesn't. Just think about your kids. When was the last time you asked them to do something and 3 days later they did it and you said, oh, thank you for obeying? No, you were about that point, you were ready to strangle them because they weren't obeying. In love. But how many of us, when it comes to God, we go, okay, God, when we get around to it, we'll do what you ask us to do. And we want Him to pat us on the back saying, good job, you obeyed. That's not obedience. So, what is holding us back from immediate obedience? People might go, oh, my responsibilities as a parent and a spouse and an employee or an employer. All I hear is I, or me. Well, I have bills. I have bills. But you don't understand my situation. Me. Okay. The only thing that really holds us back is us. We can qualify everything under us. Why don't we sign up for the early morning? And that's the amazing thing about the prayer sign up. We took the early mornings already. But why don't we sign up for early morning prayer? Well, let's make it a little bit more practical. Since the church is open every day from 7 to 8 o'clock for prayer, why don't I show up for prayer on a regular basis at church? Well, it's pretty convenient. I can't get away from that. I can't do that. We are in the way of obedience. If God says His house should be a house of prayer, that means there should be prayer happening here all the time. No. I find myself in the same trap, so I'm not pointing my finger at you guys. Well, I have a bunch of kids I have to help get ready, and my wife's had a tough night, and I have to. I need to get out of my way so that God can be pleased by the way obedience happens. So being prepared actually allows us to do something. And if we're prepared and ready to do whatever it takes, then we'll be willing to pay whatever price is needed to be paid. And that's our third point. The Magi method means we willingly pay the price to find Jesus. No, not we pay the price to find Jesus. We willingly pay the price to find Jesus. Our youth group is part of a series we're doing, talking about the church way. The church time I would use is God's economy. And we already talked about how that's upside down and backwards and weird. But the way we're talking about with youth group is we need to learn to live weird. Okay? And we were looking at the price people pay around the world to share the gospel. These are people who know that if they're caught teaching the Bible, can spend decades in prison for just having a Bible and teaching someone else. And some of the people were saying that going to jail for our faith is our form of Bible school or seminary. If you haven't been to jail because of your faith, we don't trust you to preach the Word of God because it's not real to you. You haven't sacrificed anything for it. That's kind of a sobering thought. How many of us are trustworthy? I'm not asking if you've been to jail because it was before preaching the gospel, so I'm just clarifying that. But are we willing to pay the price? Our friends and family, where we're invited to their house or they're invited to our house around this time of year on a regular basis, are we willing to invite them to church? Or do we not want to inconvenience them on Sunday morning so we tiptoe around the house and disappear so we don't wake them up? We need to be willing to pay the price. Well, they might not want to come back next year. Okay, they don't come back next year. They might invite us over there, but guess what? I go to their house over there, I'm getting up on Sunday morning going to a local church. Because the price is, God is more important, and I'm going to make sure that I honor God. But are you willing to pay the price? You see these Magi? It says they packed up and they saw the star appear. Now there's lots of theories about the star, and it doesn't matter what the star was. They recognized it as an announcement that the Christ had been born. And they packed up everything because they were prepared to do, and they headed out. They left family, they left friends, they left their civilization and their culture, they left everything that was familiar, they left their jobs, they left comfort and convenience, and they traveled for approximately 2.5 years to find Christ. Talk about a price that was paid. It wasn't just they had a bunch of treasures they bought or brought in, and that was the excess. They gave up everything to find Christ. So here's a question for you that was brought up in the movie that we were watching on Thursday night. Is Jesus worth it? Is Jesus worth what? Is Jesus worth anything and everything? Because if he's not worth anything and everything, you have the wrong picture of who Jesus is. You haven't met the Lord and Savior and encountered him in a life-changing way, because once you do, you know he's worth everything. Every dream, every desire, every heartache, every struggle, every challenge. He is worth any sacrifice you have to do because he is worth it. And the whole movie we're looking at is a missionary. He went overseas and he was preaching and sharing the gospel, and his oldest son died because they couldn't get the right medical treatment for him. And he actually asked himself, is Jesus worth it? And sent him on this odyssey to find out about the worth of Jesus, especially in persecuted countries. But they were willing, the Magi were willing, to pay the price to find Jesus. And you know, there's something interesting about that willingness. I want to go back to verses 9 and 10, because it says something interesting. Something we skip over a lot. It says that they talked to Herod, and they were pat on the back, yeah, go find the baby and let me know so I can go worship him too. And they didn't know who Herod was. They didn't know his reputation, his lifestyle. They said, okay, he wants to worship. That's a good thing. And then it says in verse 9, if you go back to it, after they heard the king, they went on their way, and the star they had seen in the east went ahead of them until it stopped at the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they were overjoyed. I want you to understand overjoyed. We read it a lot, but that means joy was flowing over them. They couldn't contain the joy they had. It was just welling up. And you might be going, okay, it was welling up. That means they were laughing and high-fiving. Yeah, we made it. No. You have to go back to what we talked about a few weeks ago when we talked about joy in the Lord. Joy in the Lord isn't an emotional response to things that are going on. That's our picture of joy. That's actually happiness and it's emotion. Joy is always seen first and foremost in our actions, and when it comes to God, in our actions of obedience towards God. So when it says that they were overjoyed, and the little point in our bulletin, in the sermon outline, is willingness is seen and joy that is expressed along the way. Are we willing to obey every day along the way to the final point? Because that's what being overjoyed is. They'd been on this odyssey, literally an odyssey for years, and they were nearing the end, and they didn't give up at the end because they were so overjoyed that they were going to obey what they had been taught to the very end so that they could do what they were designed to do, which was to worship God. Which goes back to the first message in this series. But the whole idea is, are we willing to let this willingness be seen by the overflow of joy in our life? And again, that's not an overflow of emotions, it's an overflow of obedience, because I'm so thankful to God that I can have a relationship with him that I'll do whatever he asks me to do. And I'll do whatever he asks me to do it. And as often as he asks me to do it. So do we have that overflowing? You see, joy needs to be the journey. It's not joy for an event, because that would be happiness because something happened and it makes us happy. Joy needs to be the journey that we're on. Every day, every moment, as we obey God, it demonstrates our overflowing joy for our relationship with Jesus Christ. So do people see joy in you as you go through the Christmas season? Now, I don't mean a smile on your face, because if you have the wrong smile, they'll think you're insane, especially if you're down by the malls and trying to drive down there. But is there a genuine joy that there's peace in what you do every day? There's peace in the way you go to work and interact with people. That is a sign of obedience because of your relationship with God. That's what we're talking about. And then we need to understand that any price for a relationship with Jesus is worth it. Any price. I asked that question earlier. Is he worth it? The answer is a resounding yes. And I'm not going to take time. If you want to hear illustrations of that over and over again, down in the church library, there's a movie called The Insanity of God. It's God's economy on whether he's worth it or not. It will challenge you. It will inspire you. If you want that, let me know and I'll let you borrow it. But any price for a relationship with God is worth it. They weren't concerned about how long it was going to take to find this child. They were just going to find the child. They were out to discover a relationship, and they weren't going to stop until it happened. And that brings us to verse 11. Verse 11 here says that on coming to the house, they saw the child with his mother Mary, and bowed down and said, "Wow, someone should change his diaper," and left. No, that's not what it says. That might be the practical, live it out everyday thing, but no, it says they found the child, and it says that they bowed down and worshipped him and opened up their treasures and presented him with gold and incense or frankincense, depending on your translation, and myrrh. They presented him with a fortune, literally. But it was a fortune that they had set aside, and I don't know if it was just these Magi, or for the last 800 years they had been gathering this fortune to honor the king that all heaven was going to proclaim was born. But they came and they did this. And our fourth point simply is this, is the method of the Magi, it will always lead to surrendering our treasures in worship. To surrendering our treasures in worship. In a way that shows God gets the glory and the honor and it exalts him. But are we willing to do that? You see, they brought some amazing, valuable stuff. They brought the gold and the frankincense and myrrh, but sometimes we get confused over what treasures are. In fact, sometimes it looks like this. I don't know if you can read that, but there's two of them got it right, and one of them brought Frankenstein's. Okay, if I have to explain. But we're a lot like the guy who brought Frankenstein. We think we have this incredible treasure, and it's just this kind of poor pitiful monster waiting to be set free. But sometimes we think that's our treasure. We brought our treasure to God. God, look at what I gave you. And God's going, you missed it. I wanted your treasure, not stuff. I wanted your treasure, not that. I want your treasure, not your excuses. And yet we bring it and we're so proud of what we brought. And I don't have to go back and redo that one, but I want us to understand that our greatest treasure and the greatest treasure that they brought was themselves and their time. Our greatest treasure is ourself and our time. Do we give that to God freely and willingly whenever he asks, or is that the thing that we hold back the most? Oh yeah, I'll throw money in the offering plate. I'll support this cause or that cause. I'll bring food for the neighbors in need offering that we're doing next week. But don't ask me to volunteer time. Come on, Pastor, I'm busy. We're all busy. And that's the problem. Because our busyness is focused usually on us and what we want, not on worshiping God and what he wants. They had, literally, think about it, they had left to worship God, and by the time they got home, it was probably 3.5 to 4 years after they left. 3.5 to 4 years of 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, of giving themselves and their time to God. Can you imagine what would happen if we just gave half a year to God? Focused, intentional half a year to God? We would change this community in ways they couldn't imagine. But we hold back on the greatest treasure we have. They had stuff. Yes, they brought stuff. But the greatest treasure is ourselves and our time. When was the last time we willingly jumped in and said, I will do whatever it takes to help God accomplish this thing? It was interesting. At pastor's prayer recently, we were talking with the pastors, and one of them made a statement that I disagree with, but I didn't jump on their case. And they said, society has changed. You can't get volunteers anymore. If you want to get something done around the church, you have to pay someone to do it. And I thought that is a sad statement, because I went to the Northwood show and I watched their people who pay to be part of the choir. Okay, you have to pay to be part of the choir. And they put in their time, they did the show, and then afterwards, 2/3 of them stayed to clean the theater, to reset the tables, to vacuum the floor, to make sure everything was set up for the next one. And it was all volunteer. If the local community theater gets more volunteers than the church gets, the church is missing this point. We're forgetting what it's all about. The Magi method leads to surrendering our treasures in worship to God. If we realize that what we do when we come in here and we're cleaning, if we're part of the cleaning crew, when we're scrubbing the toilets, someone does it, it has to happen. I've done it more often than I want to care to admit, because I might not be the best at doing it, but I do it. But I go, man, I can't believe I'm just scrubbing on the toilet. And can't people just aim? Why is a women's toilet so many? Okay. No, it's God, thank you for a chance to serve your people. And I pray for the people who are going to be coming in this building, not necessarily into the bathroom, but in the building. Because it's my chance to worship God. If I just do the work, then I'm just doing work. But if I do the work with an attitude of worship and focus on God, it changes everything. Are we willing to give that which is most important to us? Because you see, this is a lifestyle of worship we're talking about. When we surrender everything to God, it means we leave it in His care, and we have the freedom to do whatever He's asked us to do, because we're not worried about that anymore. When was the last time you surrendered, well, let's just say 5 hours a week to something? Now, if you're under a certain demographic or over a certain demographic, the last time we did that was this past week, and what you surrendered to was a little electronic device that you hold in your hand. Because they say the average person spends 3 hours a day on it doing nothing productive. So don't tell me you don't have the time, because we have the time, we just invested it in pointless stuff. How many of you are religious about watching the news? I'm not asking for a show of hands. You can surrender that hour a day and be much happier by not watching the news and by serving God instead. I like the amens, but what is God asking you to surrender so you can invest the time in His kingdom? We all have the time. No, Pastor, you don't understand. I do understand. I'm in the process of raising 10 kids. I have lots to do. I have a growing farm. I have lots to do. I pastor a church. Oh wait, I don't have anything to do. I'm kidding. I have lots to do. So where's my extra time? Well, I usually spend it with my eyes shut on the pillow. Oh, God wants you to sacrifice your sleep? Occasionally He does. He'll wake me up in the middle of the night, and He'll have one person specifically, or some people specifically on my heart, and that's my call from Him to sacrifice and invest my time praying for those people, and don't go back to sleep, because then I'll have a horrible rest, which isn't restful at all, and I won't be able to accomplish what God's called me to do, but when I surrender it, I'll have all the energy and joy I need for the next day. Are we willing to surrender? Are we willing to let it become this lifestyle we lead, a lifestyle of worship to our Lord? We sang beautiful songs about worship. God doesn't want our songs. He enjoys them, but He doesn't want them. He wants our life to be a life of worship to Him. And that brings us back to the last verse, which is kind of, well, when you see it, the point you might be going, that's redundant. And the last verse is this: having been warned in a dream not to go back to Herod, they returned to the country by another route. You might be going, that's not mentioned anywhere before, Pastor. How can it be redundant? Well, the point from there is the Magi method means we understand the times. That's our first point. But it's repeated because understanding our times isn't a one-time event. Some of us are a little bit older. Some of you might understand the times where they said 19 years ago, almost, Make sure you turn off all your electronic devices on New Year's Eve. Because all electronics will cease to function because it's Y2K and nothing's going to work. Okay? People go, huh? That's stupid. Just going to leave it there. But the warnings that were happening back there don't apply necessarily to today. So we understand the times now because times change. So we always have to be in a process of understanding. The wise men, the Magi, had seen the signs and they understood they were supposed to go worship God. They went and they worshiped God, but they kept an eye open, they kept an ear open so they could continue to understand. And when an angel appeared to them saying, don't go back to Herod, they said, okay, we hear, we understand, we're going to act on our understanding because understanding always leads to action. And they went back by a different route. Even though they knew how they got there, they decided, okay, we're going to wander a little bit differently because we understand the times, and the time says don't go back the way we came. Are we continually keeping an eye open and an ear open and our heart open to understand what God is saying about the times? This is a continual process and part of life. It really is. Now, here's a question for you. Do you have anything like the Magi method set up in your life where you can stay focused on what's important? Some of us, it might be simple as changing our location to get the right method in place because our location is full of distraction. So if you try to have your devotions in the family room when the kids are watching TV and there's music playing and the animals are running around, maybe that's a bad place for you to have your devotions. Because there's too much distraction, so just change your location. Maybe you're in church and you're trying to worship God, but the piano is really loud. And I don't know why they let pianos be in church because, they're really loud. It's a joke, okay? But if the piano's a little bit too loud, move to the other side and you won't be distracted by that. It's not that big a deal. Just move location. Get away from the distractions so that you can. And that's understanding the times. There was a time in my life where any noise from any person would distract me, especially as a pastor. But then I had kids. And there can be bombs going off and I won't be distracted because I'm used to that, okay? I understand the times that have changed. There used to be a time when I worried about whether my hair was combed properly or not. Okay, I still do, but it's a little bit different now. Do you understand the times? It's an ongoing process. So here's my question. Do you have a method to stay focused on what's important at Christmas? Or do you have to admit that you've been distracted and remember the biggest distraction in our life is us? I want you to think about that as you bow your heads and close your eyes.